Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, we're going to be doing a meta update. Which specializations are the top performers for this new Dragonflight PvP season? And let's start talking about why. We're going to be looking both at the European region as well as the US region to try and decipher if there are any similarities, parallel lines, or differences between the regions in terms of class representation. You can see that I've got a graph here that is currently representing specializations that are above 1800 rating, roughly at the end of the first week. And when we take a look at the graph, you see a very steep curve towards the left, some pretty heavy purple, and that purple is represented by Havoc Demon Hunter, followed by Discipline Priest, surprisingly with very high representation. I think that this specialization usually has high representation even when it's not a top performer. Even last season it had decent representation, and now it is looking like a strong performer, so that on top of it already being one of the most fun healers is really skyrocketing this one to the top. And Unholy Death Knight, since their recent rounds of buffs coming in on Tuesday, I talked about that in a video, they are now getting represented even more so than Warriors. So this seems to be a really good patch for Death Knights, Disc Priests, and Havoc Demon Hunters in the top 3 position. Let's see what this looks like for the top 3 position in Europe, though, to see if there are any differences between them. Europe with 1800 rating plus, and it's a very similar line: Havoc Demon Hunter, Discipline Priest, and Unholy Death Knight. So the top 3 between both regions is shared. I think one thing that is a bit surprising, though, is the representation of Resto Druid. I was really anticipating Resto Druid to be the most popular healer and the strongest healer. I think if we were to host a tournament right now for 3v3, that Resto Druid would likely be the healing specialization that edges above all of the other ones. So even despite how powerful it is, its representation is actually still low overall. And this may represent meaning that specializations that are down here could likely still be strong. They're just being outshined by Demon Hunter. Now, there are obviously some mechanics with Demon Hunter that are absolutely busted. I think the damage modifiers right now between Essence Break and Elysian Decree, where we're seeing Death Strike or Death Sweeps hitting 300,000 plus damage, Elysian Decrees hitting 300,000 plus damage. These are instant cast abilities. They're very difficult to be able to react to with how hard they're able to hit immediately. Those stacking modifiers are likely something that needs to be toned down, and it's something that has been toned down on classes in the past. Albeit, though, I think if you were to host a tournament, Havoc Demon Hunter would actually probably not win. I think that Subtlety Rogue, which is surprisingly represented at 51 total spots, would likely be one of the best specializations to be able to win a solo shuffle tournament at the moment, as it is kind of like the #1 counter to Demon Hunter. And we've got a tournament coming up actually on December 2nd and 3rd for Void.gg. They're going to be doing a solo shuffle tournament, which I'm going to be casting. So I'm kind of making a prediction for myself, assuming that there aren't any changes from this point up until that tournament, that even despite Demon Hunter's representation being this high, at the highest level of play, the mechanics of something like a Subtlety Rogue, which are more difficult to pull off for the average player, which is why its representation is much lower, and more difficult to pull off with no voice communication, which is again why its representation is lower in Solo Shuffle, it would actually have the mechanics to be able to win the whole thing. So when you're looking to pick like what specializations should I main, what's looking strong in this bracket, you have to take those things into account. The fact that there is no voice, the fact that there is no coordination, and the mechanics of some other specializations are much more difficult to pull off in terms of the rotation, whereas Demon Hunter is kind of just and then you're doing maximum damage, right? Some specializations have fallen off with this patch. We can see Retribution Paladin definitely taking a bit more of a hit, as it previously was in that top percentage. Now it's dropping down into the bottom 4. Windwalker is still having a pretty strong showing overall. I was expecting it to be maybe a little bit better than this, but it's definitely still strong. Assassination is surprisingly overtaking every rogue specialization. Again, I think it's because Assassination's mechanics are a bit easier to play, probably the easiest of any rogue spec, where it's just attack a target, kidney shot it on cooldown, and eventually bleed it down until it dies. You're almost playing more like a warrior in that sense with this specialization. Subtlety still trumps Outlaw, despite, I've seen a lot of creators talking about how powerful Outlaw was going to be. I definitely think I underranked it. It's a lot better than I was expecting it to be, but even with it being a lot better than I expected it to be, and other creators ranking it very high, its representation is still pretty low. And again, it's the mechanics of the spec with no voice, and its comp variability, right? Outlaw is not going to be the most viable with a whole bunch of other different specs in the game, but if you host a 3v3 tournament, Outlaw Rogue's probably winning it with Fire Mage or Arcane Mage and likely a Holy Priest, which again is really surprising because Holy Priest is at 2.88% healing. I think the only thing with healing right now that's caught everybody off guard is that Preservation Evoker just can't keep up with the damage. Something has happened with Preservation Evoker that its output is just not there, and I've seen that as feedback from anybody that has really been trying to play Preservation Evoker, is that it's actually surprisingly the worst healer. I was expecting that to go to Holy Paladin, which is trumping Holy Priest, which I did not anticipate to be this low. I don't know if this is just because Holy Priest and Disc are shared on the same class, and everyone's like, this is more fun. And even if the Holy is the same power level, this one's more fun, so everyone's going to play it. And maybe Holy Priest is fine. I think I'm going to try it on my stream today, so if you want to check that out, it's linked in the description down below to try and get a better feel for what's going on with the healer balance. Wrestler Shaman coming in the mid, I think, makes sense. Holy Paladin coming a little bit lower, and Mistweaver Druid pretty close to each other. But Disc definitely blowing everybody out of the water with the start of this patch. Now, DPS balance, I was not expecting AUG to fall off this hard. AUG is just like completely fallen off the planet. I mean, maybe that's for a good thing. And honestly, the ranged balance seems to be, a lot closer than the melee DPS balance overall if we ignore augmentation. Demonology at 15%, Beastmastery at 13%. Now, Beastmastery is experiencing this weird point where the class got bugged and your pets were scaling off weapon damage, but now they've decided to keep that. And now BM Hunter is just suddenly the best hunter spec because of that bug that wasn't really foreseen moving into this patch, but it's doing a disgusting amount of damage. So I'm not surprised to see it this high. Destruction, Super Sleeper, especially with the 2-set bonus, I've really been enjoying mine, so I'm not surprised to see it up here. Balanced Druid with its powerful kit and really well-rounded playstyle, not surprising to see it in the top 5. Ellie Shaman in the top 5, but I honestly think that it might be falling off a little bit in terms of its overall power. I was expecting Hunter to do a lot better than this. I don't know if it's because the Demon Hunters and the Death Knights are just running them down and they can't really get anything going, especially with the representation of how many plate classes are doing so well compared to the mail and leather armor types towards the bottom end. So is somewhat falling off. Fire Mage doing I'd say a tiny bit better than I was expecting it to. Its damage output just seems to be remarkable at the moment, and may just do a decent job of kiting these melee around in circles, so I don't think it's surprising. Same thing for Devastation, right? Devastation is really powerful in melee. It got a lot of buffs, so it's doing a lot better in a healthier position than before. Affliction, still kind of the same struggles, right? Especially with Demon Hunters running you down. It's really tough to get dots going. It's going to be difficult, but it's a lot better than it was. It's definitely improved from last season. Frost Mage, you would expect to be doing better than this, given the fact that so many melee DPS are represented in this bracket, and Frost is, one of the best to queue into that, but it's kind of falling off. Same thing with Arcane. The Mage specs are definitely struggling, which is something that I had predicted for this. And then Shadow Priest is also struggling, and this is, again, likely, Windwalker, Warrior, these melee cleave compositions where you're not able to coordinate defenses with your team as well. Definitely gonna be more difficult to pull off damage. My recent experience playing it was the same. It just felt like your lethal damage was not really there, although you are really durable and tanky. And I think the 2-minute cooldown Mass Dispel has hit you really hard as a Shadow Priest, which is why its representation is starting to fall off. I think Frost Death Knight is no surprise. I think that this prediction for the patch was 100% spot on. Something like Fury Warrior, though, it's similar to Holy Priest and Disc. I think once Fury gets its set bonuses, its power is very comparable to that of Arms. I think it then becomes a situational thing where Fury is better into Warlocks and Shadow Priest, but Arms Warrior is better into melee DPS. But Fury is a lot better than this representation shows, I believe, once you get your set bonuses and you get geared up. And something to not take away from this if you're Fury main, I think if you stick to it, that it's definitely going to be worth it in the end for you. And then Feral Druid being at 1% representation above 1800 is really surprising to me, because I've seen a lot of people who are playing Feral Druid talking about how the set bonuses are unlocking a lot of bleed damage for you, the clone control for it, but I could see just getting run down by Demon Hunters, forcing you into bear form would be definitely tough for you to be able to get any sort of pressure going out. So I'm not entirely surprised to see its representation this low, but I think the power is definitely comparable. If they can tone down the modifiers here on Demon Hunters, so those crits are not hitting the top end of 300,000, I think it's going to get put a little bit back more in line. Frost Death Knight, I think, is just in dire need of a rework if we're going to be able to see it at high levels of play. And Rogue is, again, it's just with no communication and with the skill cap being a lot higher in terms of what do you need to execute to be able to win a game. On Havoc Demon Hunter, it's just do your rotation. You know, occasionally stun the healer and do your rotation. You're most likely going to be winning most of your matches. Subtlety Rogue is which target do I need to attack? Because at any moment that could change in terms of priority. Did somebody on my team randomly stun DR somebody that I, was going to be my main target that I'm going after? Am I lining up my cooldowns perfectly? Am I managing my DRs? Am I also saving DRs to protect my healer if I need to? There's a lot more management going into Subtlety Rogue, but its power is easily comparable to that of Demon Hunter. So when we look at this and it's 2% to 30%. Again, with this Void.gg tournament that's coming up, I think we're really going to see, the power of a spec that's at 2% able to win the entire tournament. And it's just because for the average player above 1800, it's way easier to play classes where it's just pull off as much damage as possible, right? These classes are all doing some of the highest DPS, and they're the highest represented. And you could argue that for the healers as well, especially with the new damage build. And that's representation on US. If we look at EU, it's still about roughly the same in terms of representation. Subtlety is doing better than Assassination, I would say, on this region. Obviously, EU rogues are better, I suppose. And Ellies are doing better than Boomkin, but I'm also not surprised by this. I feel like there's just more Ellies in EU. But the graph is pretty much looking the same down the board with Preservation Evoker. So the most urgent things I think that they need to look at, if there are going to be PvP changes coming through, is Preservation Evoker buffs definitely need to happen. Frost Death Knight needs something going on here. Likely some durability increases for Feral Druid could help it out here, because I think its damage is probably fine, but it's getting pinned down by all these classes. Rain down some of the damage modifiers for Demon Hunter so that they're not stacking huge modifiers and getting these massive crits. And then enhancement, I really would like them to alter the build. I think that the Ascendance proccing Doomwinds build is basically you either proc Ascendance and you get to win the game for no reason, or it doesn't proc, or it procs at the wrong time and you can't win ever. I really don't like this talent being the best option. I think it was much better when it was oriented towards Lava Lash or Storm Strike and around sustained damage. And that's the direction that they had been taking a lot of classes so far in previous patches. So it's surprising to not see them want to follow that trend, which has worked out in terms of enhancing the representation and performance of a lot of other specializations. So those are like the bottom specs that I would like to see get some help. And if we tone down Demon Hunters and then see how things play out, because this is something where you got to tweak a couple of things at a time. Because if you tweak a whole bunch of things at a time, what ends up happening is what happened to Demon Hunters at the beginning of the expansion, where they were represented like this, and then they ended up on the bottom for like 7 months. So a couple of tweaks to these lower represented specs that definitely need attention, and then some modifier changes to Demon Hunter. And I think that, you make those changes a couple week after week after week, that this graph starts evening out a lot and the game becomes super fun. I really do think it's in a position where the game can be really fantastic, and it just needs a couple of tweaks. That's my meta assessment here for week number 1 for Dragonflight Season 3. If you like this video, thumbs up, comment down below with your thoughts and your experience going on with this patch. If you agree with me with these changes that I'm proposing, let me know. And other than that, thank you for watching the video. I will see you in the next one.